Hello, and welcome to an intro to Anthro with two humans. I'm human number one, John McCray.
And I'm human number two, John Lehr.
And this is the podcast where we reassess what it means to be human. And the title of this episode is Borderlands Feels Like We've Already Lost Our Minds. and I'm not sure we're going to be talking about borders today, but as you're probably aware, that title is a reference to the 1983
Madonna.
song Borderline by Madonna's
Of course.
self-titled debut album.
Their debut album. I believe that song rocketed to number one. Old school Madonna. There you go.
Yeah.
I know, and I love Madonna, and Michael Jackson's music. Now it's all completely tainted. But man, for me, the 80s were rough music-wise.
Really?
It was real rough, yeah.
Yeah.
It was just a vast wasteland of pop music. And I know the pop music now, they look back as the pop music being that was like the golden age of pop rock music.
Yeah.
But God, as a heavy metal guy, a hard rock guy, it was rough.
Not new wave. Didn't like new wave.
New wave, no. No. I kind of bought into REM sometimes, but no, it was rough until Guns N' Roses came in. And then, that sparked, the grunge era where that was awesome.
Yeah.
But up until then, oh God, it was rough. It was rough.
I liked anything. I liked the Jam back in the anything like Angry in English. I really liked.
Yes, yeah. So, punk did it for me, but it was, I don't know. It did it for me, but it wasn't until grunge came in that I was like, all right, I found my people.
I wasn't into Madonna back then, but you couldn't not be aware of Madonna back in the early 80s, And in the song, Madonna actually sings, "Borderline feels like I'm going to lose my mind. You just keep on pushing my love over the borderline."
Yeah. Somebody's pushing her love over the borderline.
Right.
And she's going to lose her mind.
Right. And this seemed like a good
love
title.
Has a wall.
Right.
What she's saying is there's a wall. Okay? Like in Game of Thrones, the ice wall. And you can't take her love past there. If you do, she's going to go crazy and lose her mind.
Thank you for dissecting that metaphor. Thank you.
You're not the only professor on this podcast, okay?
I'm a sucker for a good metaphor. As soon as you started going down there and saying what it meant, I was like, okay, I'm there. Okay.
Do you have a wall that your love can't go past?
Oh, yeah. Multiple walls and a minefield and a trench and barbed wire.
But Mary's been able to push it past all of that.
She's got a visa. She comes in every once in a while. And it seems like, this was a good title for today's episode because nothing makes people lose their minds more than international borders.
Oh my God.
About international borders.
Boy, here we are. You and I, even in tackling this topic, are already in a minefield.
I know.
Here we go.
And especially during an election year that you can't turn on the news or look at anything without the border coming up.
Yes. Yeah.
And usually it's funny people don't say a border. They say the border, even though we have obviously two borders.
Yeah.
We have one border up north.
Yeah.
Between Canada and the U.S. is actually the longest international border in the world. But yet people don't seem to be so upset about that border.
No, because they're white.
Right.
That's the answer. Canadians are white.
Yeah. And last year we were on our way to a graduation at Purdue University in Lafayette, Indiana. Maybe West Lafayette or West Lafayette.
Is this one of Mary's relatives?
Yeah, her niece. And we were driving in the middle down a 2-lane country road in northwestern Indiana.
Yeah.
And out in the middle of nowhere, there was a billboard that said, "It's the border." so
Right
I
dead
mean,
center in our country.
yeah. And we were in the middle of nowhere. And, I
Indiana
live.
is a steam cooker. Indiana, there's something anytime you start tucking your sweaters into your jeans, things are there. It's a straw house. It's a house of
Yeah,
cards over there. Indiana's
yeah.
ready to explode.
It's it was so funny though because you live 2.5 hours from the border with
Yes.
Mexico.
Yes, I do. I've been
I
into
live
living in there many times.
Yeah, I live 4 hours from the border with
Mhm.
Mexico here in Albuquerque. And rarely does the border come up in conversation that
I know.
much.
I know.
I've even been to Las Cruces, New Mexico, which is right down on the border, and
Mm,
Mesilla, which is right down there. And they used to be part of Mexico.
mm,
And you pass through a border patrol station coming back from
mm.
there,
Yep.
and even there, people don't really. I never heard anybody talking about the border. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah, I know. It's yeah, same here. Same here. My daughter and I have gone down the Baja a few
Yeah,
times, and which is fun. It's so gorgeous. There's wine country. So
really.
you go down to Ensenada and turn left
Yeah,
and go east. There's like this incredible wine country out there
really.
with beautiful places, Airbnb places, and then
Yeah,
you go
yeah.
all the way to the other side, into
Was it the
um,
Sea of Cortez or
the
something
Sea of
over there?
Cortez, and we always go. The salt content is so high there that you can just float. You just float.
Wow,
Yeah, you don't have
wow.
to try at all. You just float, and then we ride an inflatable hat,
Banana. Oh
sombrero,
no,
or
really?
there's another inflatable banana. There's two guys that drive around. We'll ride those, and then we'll drive
Competing or
back.
same company? Same company. Like you want
It's the
the hat
same
or
guy. Yeah, it's
yeah.
the same guy. There's only those towns along the Sea of Cortez have seen much better days. Much better days.
Do you have to reserve which one you want, or do you just first come first
There's
serve?
no reserving. You have to go tell the guy where you're staying, and then
Yeah.
he'll drive it over late sometime in the afternoon, and then you get on it.
Really?
Yeah,
Which
it's
one do you
awesome.
prefer? The
The
banana or
sombrero is
oh, really?
so fun. They're both fun, but
Okay.
the sombrero, because you're spinning at
Yeah,
times and you
yeah,
just get thrown out of this thing at high speeds. This guy is crazy.
yeah.
I mean, just crazy. He's insane.
Well, that's that's let me write I'm gonna jot that down. That's good
Yeah, I highly
information for
recommend
people
it.
who
And you can't drown. You just got to get to your back and you're fine. You just wait to float back to the beach.
Yeah, that's the biggest safety feature is
Yep.
that the salt content's so high.
Yeah. Yep.
Uh, but anyway, John, we are both part of the borderland
Yes,
here,
we
where
are.
and that's the hybrid zone where Mexico and the United States meet, and where the cultures blur and they influence one another, and they're tied together, like on both
Mhm.
sides of the borders.
Absolutely.
Or as Adalberto Aguirre and Jennifer Simmers say in the article, Mexican border crossers, the Mexican body and immigration discourse, they say, quote, the border shared by the United States and Mexico is more than just a line on a map demarcating the geographical separation between two countries. It identifies a sharing of geographical, cultural, and social space between two neighbors.
Hmm.
The two neighbors are joined together by the border, almost like a seam between two pieces of cloth on a quilt.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, yeah. In other words, there was a border drawn across this part of the country in the 1850s, but yet the people on both sides of those borders still share a common culture and a common history between them.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the best directors of photography that our company works with when we shoot,
Yeah,
he was born. One father was on the Mexican side, mother on the American side, and he grew up going
yeah,
back and forth and living part time in each.
yeah, yeah. so, so that to me, it's just we don't talk about here because it's just part of like both sides are
Mhm.
kind of the same in the
Mhm.
borderland
Yeah,
region.
that's true.
And yet for, other parts of the country, which are days away from the border, for example,
Yes.
the border can cause a lot of fear and anxiety, I
Yes.
think.
Yes.
Um, and so, like, when I saw that sign, that billboard up in northwestern Indiana saying, "It's the border,"
Yep.
I'm like, "What border are you talking about exactly? The border with Illinois or, like, Canada? Are Canadians coming down Lake Michigan and, like, crashing their boats into the Indiana dunes and taking off running or something, you know? It's like, um
You can't even get a good burrito in Indiana.
I know. What are you worried about? What are you worried about? It would be the last place I'd want to go, you know what I mean? It's like, uh, but anyway, but it's clear that, the border has become this vaguely defined entity where terror resides.
Yeah.
And I would even say that to a lot of people, the border has become synonymous with all the source of all evil.
Mm.
And especially for people that don't really come into contact with the border or,
Yeah.
or, or go to Mexico or even have
Yeah.
any direct contact with Mexico.
Yeah.
And in the article, The Mexico US Border in the American Imagination, Douglas Massey quotes Beto O'Rourke, who at the time in 2016 was a US representative from El Paso, Texas.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And Beto O'Rourke said, "There's a long-standing history in this country of projecting whatever fears we have onto the border. In the absence of understanding the border, people insert their fears." And I think that's what we see. And then Douglas Massey himself says the framing of the Mexico-U.S. border as a line of defense separating the United States from a hostile world taps into the very real and widespread feelings of economic and physical insecurity in the United States today.
Right. I mean, hasn't that sort of always been the case? And I guess this is where you start to get to the answer to the question, what does this have to do with anthropology?
Right,
But
right.
hasn't it always been the case that you blame your problems and your one culture's problems and fear onto the other, and the
Right.
other is whether they're you know they could
Yeah.
be Moors, or they could be the Ottoman Empire, or they could be whatever, but the
Yeah.
other,
Yeah.
the French,
Right. Right.
the yeah.
Or
So
or
yeah,
even remember when during the Depression, like in Grapes of Wrath, you had people from Oklahoma and Kansas trying to get out to California, and they were being stopped at a border, the California border, and
yes,
turned
they were.
around or
Yeah.
directed farther north, or
Yeah, because they didn't want those poor families coming
yeah,
in. Yeah, and most of the time it's an economic thing,
right.
a racial and economic thing. Most of the times, it seems.
And what Massey says is it's much easier though and more palatable for politicians to chastise federal authorities for failing to hold the line and make a show of throwing more money into counterproductive but symbolically useful border enforcement than actually tackling the intractable problems that underlie terrorism and inequality today.
Well, that sounds like a real lefty to me. Who's that?
Douglas Massey.
Okay, Massey. Bring your
Yeah.
pinko. Take your pinko opinion somewhere else.
but the thing is, John, I don't like living in fear. I don't.
Yeah, yeah,
I think when you live in fear, uh, without reason, you can be immobilized. You know what I
yes,
mean?
yes.
And you begin to imagine things that aren't there. Your senses are heightened. You're on the alert all the time, and things that everything that happens to you becomes an assault.
Right, right. Yeah, that's true.
And so I thought today what we could do is we try to turn on the lights, to use another metaphor.
Okay.
Try to turn on the lights and take a look at what's actually happening with the border, or
Okay.
take a look under the bed, see if there really is a
Let's
monster
get
there.
down in there. Let's see what we've got. Let's see what we've got.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right?
or go up and, like, this would be like going up and confronting the bully. You know what I mean? Let's
Yes.
go up and whatever our
Yeah.
fear
We're
is.
not giving you our lunch change today.
Right. Right. And you know what? We may get our asses kicked. We may
Yeah.
get your ass kicked by it
Well,
and
wait a
realize,
minute. I don't want that. That's where my fear is. I'm not scared of the border. I'm
yeah.
scared of getting my butt kicked. I
But at least you know what I mean? If you went up to a bully and you got your ass kicked, you'd be like, yeah, you know what? I should stay away from that person.
I already know. I know which
So,
ones. I know
yeah.
who to stay away from. I'm the guy who just runs away. I'm just a
Really?
terrified. Yes, I don't want to
Yeah.
change or. I mean, I'll be a foot soldier. I vote. That
Yeah.
I'll do.
Yeah.
But I don't want to get in anybody's face. God no.
Yeah. Yeah, I usually don't, but when people get in my face, I get a little
Well,
upset.
yeah, but you are in perfect condition, and you're a black belt, right? Are
A
you a black
brown
belt?
belt. I'm a brown
Brown belt.
belt, technically.
Well, and
Yeah.
even before you were a brown belt, you could kick people's ass. You've always been able to do it. I am not. I
Yeah.
am I'm the guy who stands behind you.
Can't you just like spaz out or something? Can you like just go crazy and then like one of those people? And
I try, but I'm just so terrified.
yeah.
I'll try though.
All right. Metaphorically, at least today,
Yeah.
let's metaphorically do this.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about borders from an anthropological perspective, and that's the history of borders, the mixed cultures you find around borders, and the
Mm.
cultural symbolism of borders.
Mhm.
And as we've mentioned before, this is one of the topics, and we've had a few where we are going to have to walk lightly around this one.
Yeah, we are.
Because nothing gets people worked up right now more than talking about borders.
Yeah, you've got that right.
Yeah, and you know
I'll
what?
buy that for $1.
I'll be honest with you. This episode was very hard to put together because it's such a vast topic when
Yeah.
you look at it.
Yeah.
And and I'm talking about not just the Mexico-U.S. border, but all borders, whether they be like Northern Ireland or the Iron
Mhm.
Curtain, historically the Berlin Wall, the demilitarized zone in Korea, the border between India and Pakistan. All of them are so loaded with meaning
Yes.
and politics that it's complicated, and I
Yes.
could never quite pin it down in the research on this one.
Right. And don't forget the border between Indiana and Mexico.
Yeah, yeah. That's a vast border. That's a vast vertical border that people aren't aware of that one.
And also, let's not forget about the Basque, you
Oh
know?
yeah, yeah. There's a lot of Basque in Bakersfield, up in
Really?
Bakersfield, California. A lot of them settled up
Mm.
there, and if you go to Bakersfield, you can get some really good Basque food up there.
Yeah, some good cod.
Yeah, salt cod and
Mhm.
lamb, some good stuff.
Mm. God, that's
Um,
making me hungry.
but originally, I went with the question, and I started out just kind of with a thesis question of trying to go, how did we go from in the '80s? Remember, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Remember
Uh-huh.
that Reagan saying
Because
that in
that
front?
that wasn't our wall.
Yeah.
We don't tear down our walls. We tell other people to tear down their walls.
Right, right. Right. We didn't care about that wall. You tear it down, whatever happens, happens. But
Yeah.
this wall over here.
Gorbachev says, "Well, what about your walls?" No, God, no. We're building more. You
Yeah.
tear yours down, though.
Well, that was my question. Is like, how did we go from tear down this wall in the '80s to now build that wall in the
Mm-hmm.
2010s?
Mm-hmm.
And in the article, Engaging with Borders, Arella Graciani and Michelle Swinkles quote the anthropologist Didier Fassin, who argued that discussion of the border requires a combined approach that focuses simultaneously on physical, social, and symbolic barriers.
Oh, here's some more libs coming in from those ivory towers.
I know. And so, in other words, borders, they're complicated. They're not just a
Yeah,
line in the
right.
sand. And I'm going to say right up front that we're not going to come to any solution
Right.
to border issues in
This
an
is the
hour of
thing
this.
that I think our culture has so many issues with is things that aren't solvable,
Right.
that aren't completely solvable, that you can only get you can improve through compromise,
Yeah.
but there's no answer,
Right. Right.
and I think we tend to like search those out, you
Yeah.
know, and
Yeah.
and really make those the focus. But the answer is unfortunate, like
Yeah.
I'll give you an example. One of my kids' dad was, and then this guy's a California lib.
Yeah.
He's upset about the homeless issue in
Right.
Los
Right.
Angeles, and but more specifically, the more I talk to him, he's really just more upset about a certain encampment that he looks at
Yeah.
under
Yeah.
the viaduct as he drives home. And he said, "You know what we should do?" And anytime somebody says that, you know,
Yeah.
you got trouble.
Get ready for a doozy.
Yeah, because you know what we should do?
Yeah.
We should get them all together and put them in a camp, out in the desert, because I'm sure
Yeah.
some of them know how to make shoes and some know could do this or that,
Yeah.
and put them all out there. And I'm like, are you talking? That sounds like a camp to me.
Yeah. A
He's Jewish.
concentration camp.
Yeah, he's Jewish, by the way.
Yeah.
And he goes,
Yeah.
no, no, no. And I say, well, let me ask you this: can they leave whenever they want? And there's a long pause.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not sure the camp idea is going to go over so
Right.
well.
Right. And it's still somebody, I mean, people have freedoms, guaranteed by the Constitution. And
But he just wants to build him a town. But
Yeah.
but then at some point there's some barbed wire around that town.
Right. Right. And guard towers around that and searchlights.
I'm like, we tried that with the Japanese.
Yeah. Yeah.
Didn't go over so well.
I remember I worked for a time for The Big Issue, which was that British paper that sold by homeless people, usually in London
Yes.
and Edinburgh.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm going to tell you, I don't know a solution to homelessness, but I'll tell you this: I don't wish homelessness on anybody.
No.
Because it's awful. It's
Well,
awful.
it's always been a part of being of human society. There's always been people who are, I don't know what you want to call them, beggars in the, they've been called all kinds of different things.
But unfortunately,
lowborn.
we'll do an episode just on homelessness and housing, and we'll get
by
into
the
that.
end we'll solve it. We're going to solve it.
I don't solve anything. I have no answers. I have only questions. But I do believe that when it comes to the border, we need to keep hard drugs like fentanyl out of the United States.
Yeah.
And
out of Mexico. They should be
right.
kept out of everywhere.
Right. But there's like a flow of guns going down there. So for Americans to think that there's only bad things coming north of the border, there's also bad things going south of the border from America into Mexico as well.
Yeah.
And so that's why, I think we need to do background checks maybe, or maybe even do like more funding to expedite visa applications and background checks. I don't know what the solution is.
Well, it's lots of things. It's never solved, quote unquote.
Right.
It's never solved. You got to give up on the idea of solving it. And then you start to go, okay, how can we mitigate it? What can we do to help?
Yeah.
And that's, I guess it's walls and cops and people at the border, but it's also, like you said, economic things.
Right.
And it's a combination. It's a multi-pronged attack. I've solved it, and I will post a link to my solution in the comment section.
Cue music. We've solved it. But I would say that I feel that trying to like make a better life for yourself or your family is a very human desire.
Right.
And I don't begrudge that to anybody who is trying to do that.
Yeah.
And that's I think that's something that we can all agree upon. That's something I would do myself. Like if I was broke and it was dangerous for my family, I would try to make a better life for my family somewhere. But I would say for people who are coming to this country, just know that in the last 10 years, Americans have gone a little crazy.
Yeah.
We have a lot of assholes here, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I was thinking maybe we should do like a foreign exchange program where where people can come up and try to see if they even want to come here first. You know what I mean?
Yeah, boy, that's true.
And when I worked for the Italian Tourist Board, one of my jobs was to answer complaint mail. Okay.
Oh God.
And so tourists would write
Who's
in
gonna
and usually
complain to the Italian travel office? Jesus.
I know.
Who has time for this?
That's what it was back in the 90s. I'm sure it's worse now because people can just dash off an email. But at the time, people would actually have to type out a letter, seal it, or write it out.
Oh my God.
Go to the post office, mail it. But
boy.
But they would usually complain about like how a hotel treated them or what happened at a hotel or a cruise line. But there were a number of complaints about how how they were treated by the Italians during their trip. So people would write in and complain to the Italian government. Can you imagine writing a government entity?
Are they hoping that there's going to be some sort of law that's passed where you've got to be nicer? Like, what are they hoping for, you think?
I don't know, but they would essentially be like, I found during my whole trip the Italians weren't very friendly to me. And it was common, it's similar to where like people complain about the Parisians. Like, oh, the Parisians are so rude. The Parisians are rude to everybody.
Yeah,
they just don't have time.
That's what you're paying money for, is for them to be rude to you.
Right. But I could never, and I get them and I'd have to read them. And then fortunately, I didn't have to respond to them. I would just send them out like, this has been forwarded on to Rome. But I would date stamp it and send it on to Rome,
Oh my God.
But can you imagine like complaining about an entire country?
No.
And I always try to imagine like what would happen, like when they said the people in Florence weren't very friendly to me, and like the mayor of Florence having to call in people one at a time, all of the citizens to reprimand them,
hey,
like
listen,
a business.
We've gotten some reports.
I'm not going to name names, but if you guys could all be a little friendlier when you're out there in
listen,
your lives.
I've been traveling a lot lately internationally, and people aren't so thrilled with America. We're much more thrilled with ourselves than they are with us.
Right. And I would, John, I was thinking about it too, is that anybody that's ever worked in a restaurant or worked security at a museum or maybe at a concert or for TSA or Social Security or DMV or an airline or law enforcement or prison, it's an endless flow of people that you're dealing with.
Yes.
And it's very easy to dehumanize those people.
Yes.
In fact, I would say it's hard not to dehumanize those people.
Yeah, because they become the other. They're the customer. They're when you're in any kind of a service point of view, then it's you against them. Really.
Right. You fall back with your coworkers.
Yeah.
And your coworker, you're all like looking at each other like, oh, these idiots, whatever.
Yeah.
And the people coming up to you, it's the same person that's coming up
it's
every
just another one of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But to them, it's very important to their lives.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Because we all think we're the most important thing in the world, each of us. And that's an anthropological, there's an anthropological answer to that.
Right.
That's survival. Yeah. If I don't think I'm important, then I'm not going to last very long.
Right. That's very true. If I was like, oh, okay, all right. They changed my flight. Okay, I'll just leave. I guess I won't go.
Well, I kind of am that person, though, to be honest with you.
Really?
I fold everywhere. I really do.
I didn't know that about you. I always thought you were really like...
Not anymore. I've been broken.
Oh, no.
If they say my flight's been canceled, I don't get into it. I'm just like, okay, what do I do next? I just ask them what to do and which line to stand in. I don't care.
Did you just hit Uber and go home?
Whatever. Yeah.
But that's the thing. Like, if you think about when you go up to the airline counter and you have to change your flight, and when the person behind the counter just looks over at their coworker and just rolls their eyes or just kind of like shrug. I mean, you know how that feels. It's very
Yes, it doesn't feel good.
belittling and it's
Yeah.
very dehumanizing for you.
Right.
And, and again, I would say that the challenge for us when it comes to the border is to not dehumanize people. The
Yes,
people who are,
but you're talking about, that's big.
yeah,
That's a big thing you're talking about.
it's a challenge. I admit
Yes.
it, but it becomes harder and harder not to dehumanize people. But I'm
Mhm.
saying that the challenge for us as humans
Yes.
is to not dehumanize them.
Yes. You're talking big stuff now.
Yeah, yeah.
This show,
Because
I'm submitting this show to the Webbies or whatever the
have you
fuck.
submitted the other ones? But
No.
the thing is, when you start to dehumanize other people all the time, it becomes hard not to. You start to dehumanize everybody: your
Yes.
spouse, your
Yeah.
kids,
Yeah.
your family, your
Yeah.
friends, your neighbors.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's a tough road to be on.
right, right. Because you don't feel empathy for anybody at that point.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's always funny to me because I've worked security before and I've worked in the public sector for a number of years. And it always seems to be context specific. Like I'll have people who I work with who treat all the customers or clients as like, oh, those idiots. But then when they go on a trip, and how was your trip? Oh, the cruise line just shoved us around like a bunch of cattle. It's like, well, that's what you do every day.
This is when we get into conversations with about stuff like this. I'm just like, how are we still around? How are humans still here? We're so flawed. I mean, we hate each other.
Right.
We kill each other. It just amazes me that not only are we around, but we're thriving. I mean, we're devouring this planet.
Yeah.
And then I guess we'll rocket ship off to another one and devour it.
Start over.
How are we so successful, but yet so flawed? It's just fascinating to me.
Yeah. And I would say, I don't know the answer to that. And we are social creatures. Our success has come from cooperating.
Yes.
And interacting socially with people.
But I guess in order to be social, you have to have your own tribe. That makes it feel special. And then you're more willing to, be injured over it or lay down your life or whatever. And so there has to be an other. And when there are no saber-toothed tigers anymore and no woolly mammoths and nobody's trying to get you except for germs.
Yeah.
I guess you gotta find your sector, your team. I'm not saying anything that's not that obvious, I guess. But but I guess I guess that's why we're social, but it's with an asterisk. We're social within our own, unit, our own tribe.
Yeah, and maybe, are you trying to say that it's the unit is the nation? You know what I mean? Because is that what we're trying to say? Like, that's a unit of 300 million people.
Yes.
It just seems like a very big unit.
Yes.
But, I just want to emphasize as we go through this discussion of borders today, let's not lose sight of our humanity. And again, I know it's challenging, but looking at people who are coming, immigrating to this country or trying to immigrate to this country are humans just like us who are trying to find a better life for themselves or for their families. And it's very hard not to just label them all as a group. And I feel that that's the challenge for us when it comes to borders. So in their article titled "Engaging with Borders," Irela Graziani and Michelle Swinkles says that Swinkles.
Oh God, that poor woman. No wonder she's a scientist.
I know.
All she had was books. Hey, did you hear what Swinkles did? Hey, Swinkles, Twinkles, Sprinkles. Oh my God, forget it.
But they say conceptually, borders have been a traditional anthropological topic, playing a central role in distinctions between self and other, where purity and danger, and in processes of inclusion and exclusion. And Thomas Wilson and Hastings Donnan add that borders are the political membranes through which people, goods, wealth, and information must pass in order to be deemed acceptable or unacceptable by the state.
Yes.
and in that sense, it's very similar to like waiting outside a club. You know what I mean? Trying to get into a club.
You're either in or you're out, as Heidi Klum says.
Yeah. When did you work with her? What was it that you worked with her?
I did a show called Clash of the Commercials for CBS, hosted by Heidi Klum and John Lehr, the Geico caveman. And she was a delight. Just a delight.
She really?
Oh my God. So sweet. Bought us all sushi. Just really great. I loved her. I love Heidi. And gorgeous. Don't really? Yeah. I mean, my God, just too gorgeous. Where they're too gorgeous, where you just get discombobulated even being around them.
Did you joke around? You guys joke around a little bit on set?
Yeah, she liked me because I was funny, and she was just great person.
So, John, you and I grew up in Kansas City.
Yes, we did.
And Kansas City is actually a border town.
It sure is. There's a state line road.
Right. That separates Kansas City, Kansas, or the Kansas side from the Missouri side.
And accidents, when they would happen, it would depend on what side of the road you are which ambulance would be called or which police would be,
It'd be a pain in the ass.
Yeah, it would always confuse the municipalities.
And historically, the Kansas-Missouri border was a site of armed conflict in the 1850s called the Kansas-Missouri Border War.
Yeah, the bushwhackers.
Yeah, and the Jayhawkers. Mm-hmm. And it was also called Bleeding Kansas because of all the people that were murdered or killed during the raids back and forth between pro-slavery forces in Missouri and free soil forces in Kansas.
Yes.
And the Free State town of Lawrence, Kansas was actually attacked by pro-slavery forces twice, once in 1856 and again during the Civil War in 1863. And that was when 150 citizens of Lawrence, mostly men and boys, were massacred.
Man.
Yeah. And talk about something out of the Balkans. They killed mostly men and boys.
Yeah. Who was the Quantrill? Was the leader of those guys, those forces, right?
Yeah, William Quantrill led the raid in 1863. And then also you had John Brown, the abolitionist, before he went to Harper's Ferry to try to start a slave rebellion in 1859. He lived in Kansas and was part of the Potawatomi massacre, where 5 pro-slavery people were murdered during that one. Mm-hmm. And then, ironically, now, whenever KU, Kansas University, plays Mizzou, Missouri University,
yes,
they always try to say, the media always plays it up to be like, oh, it's the Kansas-Missouri border war. And they print up T-shirts and everything.
Wow.
Yeah. And my idea is always like, hundreds of people were actually massacred during that, right?
Yeah.
That's like, okay, talk about dehumanizing. Let's just make it a funny T-shirt that we put up for a basketball game. But as you mentioned, there's a state line road that goes down the middle of the city.
And the laws are different, or were, especially when we were growing up. For example, you couldn't get liquor on a Sunday in Kansas because they had blue laws. So you would drive across state lines, right across state line, and there would be liquor stores right there that were open. You get your liquor and drive back. And it flowed the other way, because in Kansas, we could drink beer, 3-2 beer at 18. Whereas in Missouri, you had to be 21. So all the teenagers from Missouri would come over to Kansas. Not on Sundays, because that's when you would go over to Missouri to get liquor.
Yeah. But it was funny that the Missouri border, those raids back and across the border that happened back in the 1850s and 1860s, by the 1960s, 1970s, they had become just a flow of drunks.
Yes,
back and forth.
And porno. You couldn't buy a Playboy magazine in a Quick Trip or 7-Eleven on a Sunday in Kansas.
Really?
And this is before, the internet.
Yeah.
So you'd have to masturbate just using your brain. You'd have to or a Sears catalog.
Yeah, you're stretching though. You have to have a good imagination at that point.
That's what I tell my son. You don't understand how hard it was to masturbate back in my day.
Maybe that's where your improvisational skills come from.
Well, I mean, let's be honest. And this show is an example. Almost everything I do is motivated in some way with breeding, right?
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that what Darwin's all about?
We'll save that one for another topic too.
Okay. All right.
Are you trying to seduce me, Mr. Robinson?
Yeah.
But the other thing is that because of those laws, like you say, there was money that was attracted to the border. So, for example, you would have the liquor stores on Sunday on the Missouri side would make a lot of money.
Yep.
And then the 3-2 bars that were close to the border in Kansas on the other days would make a lot of money from people coming across the border for that.
Absolutely. The best 3-2 bars were in Kansas City, Kansas, right across the border. And you and I got in a lot of trouble in places like that.
I do remember one time when I just, with that little bottle of tequila between us, and he was wearing like a little serape and a hat. And I remember us in your Mustang and glancing over and seeing that we were doing like 130 or something. And yeah, that little bottle was right there with us. He was
that Mustang wasn't fast off the starting line, but you give me like 1.5 miles and I'll get that thing going. That 351 Windsor will finally get you.
Oh yeah,
we hit going. That. Once I get into fourth, let me get into fourth gear.
It stopped shaking about 80. And then we were just like smooth say it was like just glass.
Yeah, that car. Once you got it up, and all 4 barrels were open in the carb.
And then there was also illegality was created by that because people would go across the border on Sunday from Kansas.
Yeah,
and then they'd get stopped coming back.
Yes,
for bootlegging.
Yep, that's exactly right.
And I remember I had an 80-year-old great aunt who had gone over on a Sunday from Kansas in her Mercedes convertible, like really well put together, to buy. She had run out of scotch, and she wanted her cocktail, so she drove over there and got busted because she was one of the people that just drove straight back.
God, there's 2 things about that story that surprised me. First, somebody in your family owned a Mercedes?
Yeah, it was my marriage. Marriage.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, you pull over an 80-year-old grandmother who's got scotch, you let her off. Idiots.
I know. But that just shows you, like, her intentions weren't to break the law, but having that border there created a situation where illegality would happen.
She should have sat in a parking lot, gotten her drunk on, and then driven home drunk, I guess, or walked home.
It's funny that my mom actually had to take her to her sentencing. Had to go to court, so my aunt had gone to the beauty shop to get her hair done and put on all of her nice clothes and a nice purse and her rings. And my mom said it was just hilarious because she was up there with a bunch of guys who were tattooed and scarred. And everything.
Oh my God. This was your mom's mother?
No, this was my dad's aunt. So she was married to my grandmother's brother, but she was a great aunt. So,
okay,
yeah.
I got you now. Okay.
But,
so none of that Mercedes money hit your veins.
No, not at all. Like it was we were close to her, but not that close. Not that.
Yeah, close. we had some examples of that on the Lehr side.
But what Graziani and Swinkles mean when they say that material borders do something to people living around them is they mean that they create new spaces and new social realities on the ground. And again, that border in Kansas is a good example because it attracted money and investment to it.
Yeah, and so absolutely. And you see on the U.S. side of the Mexican border, there's all kinds of things there for people who are coming across legally or illegally.
Right.
You
Right.
know.
And that's what, they say, Graziani and Swinkle say that, which individuals and groups profit from strictly maintained borders. They say, well, definitely political actors, because
Mm-hmm.
they can use them symbolically.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have private security companies, who actually house the people who are crossing
Yep.
illegally.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And then they say, you also have the illegal stuff, which is going to be like the smugglers and human traffickers. And
Yeah.
then I'd say even you have, for people who are waiting to cross the border, that you have, uh, an economy that's set up there on the border to cater to those people.
Yep.
And then you also have factories, American factories, that locate just right across the border where labor is cheaper.
Yep.
And again, you have people who go shopping and go live on one side of the border, go to the other side of the border to go shopping.
Yep. Or
Um,
for medical procedures
yeah,
and
right, right.
wow, back when I was drinking and using, we were in Cabo San Lucas, and I walked down to a pharmacia and said my necco hurto, and got a big bottle of God, what was it? God, it was some opiate. I can't remember. It was a
Codeine or
muscle
something, or
relaxer. Oh, I
is it
can't remember what it
codeine? Do they
was.
give you?
Not codeine, but it was something like that. Oh
Yeah,
my God. That was a great afternoon. Great weekend.
yeah. So I can't remember anything. Can't remember
Oh
anything.
no. No, no, no.
So again, I guess the point we're trying to make is that by its mere existence, a border creates an economy and an opportunity for economic gain.
Yes.
Uh, and that it draws people to it, and it also draws money and investment to it.
Mm-hmm.
And since the 1990s and 2000s, we've seen an increase in the use of the term globalization.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
and according to Guy Ferraro and Susan Andreatta, globalization
Andreatta.
includes the worldwide trend toward open markets, deregulation, and privatization of services formerly provided by governments.
Uh-huh.
And Andreatta and Ferraro say that globalization argues that the well being of all peoples of the world will be maximized if economic systems concentrate on four basic concerns. One is continued economic growth, as measured by gross national product. Two is the continued lowering of trade barriers between nations. Three is the continued lowering of trade barriers, and privatization, shifting of governmental functions and resources to the private sector. And it's this idea of integration of international markets has led some people to argue that globalization is leading to the removal of international borders.
Right.
So you think of the European Union right now, for
Yes.
example, and one of the ways that globalization plays out on the ground is that companies outsource their work
Yes.
to other countries where labor is less expensive, or where the
Yes.
workers
Yeah.
don't ask for you know high wages.
Right.
And then if workers in a certain location start to improve their lives and ask for more money, then the companies just move somewhere else.
Right. That's
you
right.
know and this is probably the biggest problem with globalization, because workers aren't just competing with other local workers
Right.
for work. They're actually competing with workers all over the world
Right.
for work.
Now, isn't the argument that those workers, even though they've now been left in the lurch, that they've been raised up economically during the time that the business did use them? So now they're educationally and in a position where maybe they can better themselves in other ways,
Yeah, yeah.
start their own company or.
I don't know, because I think you do feel. I think that the stagnation of wages right now, for example, where people their wages
Yes.
aren't compete, the real wages aren't competing with the cost of living.
Yes.
I think that's true. I think that is.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't think, removing or like putting up a wall is going to change any of that, because I
No,
think
but I think the argument is, hey, there's not enough wealth to go around. And
right.
if we spread it all around the globe, there's going to be too little for everybody. So,
Wow.
yeah, I'm
Yeah.
just saying.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's keep ours and keep it from them, you know?
Yeah, but again, it's like it's basically going to the corporation, the global corporation,
Well,
rather than
that's
being
yeah,
paid back down to you locally. For
right.
example, at like a car plant in Indiana, for example,
Yeah.
you know. And I think that's the other thing, borders open and close at will. Like the border is not just a solid, once you close it, it's closed.
Right.
Borders can be uh, manipulated, or like if you want to direct workers to a certain area of the world, you can loosen those immigration restrictions there and tighten them elsewhere. And it's almost like a water gate, or I mean like a channel or something, like
Mhm.
opening up water to
Yeah.
irrigate.
Mhm. Right.
And what Wilson says is, Thomas Wilson notes that despite globalization's highly touted impetus to greater mobility and movement of people, goods, and ideas worldwide, in 2023, more than 80 border walls at international borders restrict their circulation, part of an explosion in border wall building that has gone on for decades.
Mhm.
And so, even with these border walls, but yet the wages locally aren't going up any.
Right.
You know,
Right. Because that argument is that yes, it leads to more profits for the corporations, but that just makes the rich richer. The people who have invested,
right,
Wall Street
right,
investors, are getting wealthier, whereas the people who are actually responsible, the workers don't
right,
share in
right.
that. Yeah.
And that's what I mean. If you look at where your clothes are made now, you'll see some countries that you haven't even thought of were
Yes.
producing clothing,
Yeah.
because corporations are just moving them around to different places to find
Right.
cheaper labor. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
The other thing that borders are, they're a powerful symbol of a nation state's power. So
Hmm.
even though the state itself will manipulate that border, it's still like having that border there, or that fortified border is just to represent that the nation state is powerful,
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
And Wilson quotes Alexander Diener and Joshua Hagan, who say that states act as rigid containers that neatly partition global space into nation state territories corresponding to distinct societies. And for many peoples, Wilson says, borders are meant to safeguard nations. So it's
Yes.
supposed to give you, even though the border is porous, for example, it's always going to be porous.
Right.
Uh, People feel like if you have a strong border, then that gives you a sense of safety wherever
Right.
you are at.
It's not so much the wall itself, it's the public's opinion of
Yeah,
how well the wall is doing its job.
right.
And no wall is going to uh, work 100% of the time. So it's really just how we see the job that's happening
Yeah,
there.
yeah. It's just
And
symbolic. It's
it's
symbolic
symbolic.
to be
Yeah.
there. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And Wilson notes that, this is something that people have been, Americans or Anglo Americans have been talking about since before we became a country. And he notes that in the Declaration of Independence, one of the charges that Americans made against King George III was that he wasn't protecting the borders against Indian attacks.
Yeah. Wow. There you
And
go.
so if you read in the Declaration of Independence, it says that King George had endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
and so to me, it's like in the 1770s, it was merciless savages, quote unquote, and
Mhm.
today it's quote drug dealers and rapists. You know
Right.
what I mean?
And they're all non-white.
Yeah, yeah. and it's been a common political trope that has been being used for 250 years
Yes.
to get people worked up.
Yes.
Uh, and then also for before anybody goes, well, yeah, but that's a reason why we need the strong borders. They haven't changed it in 250 years. The Declaration of Independence also was mad that King George was trying to limit immigration to the colonies,
Mm-hmm.
and they say that for purposes to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws for naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of land. So
Mm.
what they were complaining about was that he wasn't letting German immigrants come into the country or into the colonies
Right.
because King George was worried that they wouldn't be loyal to England, which also sounds familiar to what we
Yes.
have now.
Yes. Well, they basically what you're saying is they wanted more white people and less non-white people.
Right. And they wanted to, it's funny because they're like, we're so afraid of these Native American attacks.
Yeah.
Can't you remove them so that we can go take over their
Yeah.
lands,
Yes.
basically?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And Wilson, he further says that borders are places to witness the everyday of cultural tradition and hybridity. Borders are places where national cultures meet and where people and their social and political institutions must learn to adapt to each other to function, if not get along.
Mm-hmm.
And again, these places, he says, are often perceived to be conflictual contact points between nations with different histories, goals, and ways of being and doing.
Yes. Well, I mean that you cross the border in Detroit into Canada, and it's an entirely different thing than when you cross the border from, into Mexico from California, the
Yeah,
Californian border. It's a totally different thing in every way, and I don't know. I mean, I think it's because of skin color. I
yeah,
really do, and I think, but it's also economic. The Canadians are doing pretty well.
yeah,
There's an equilibrium there.
right,
Some
right.
people, but down on the southern border there, it's that's the real problem, it seems.
Yeah. I it's I have another good quote from Gloria Anzaldúa, and she says that the US Mexico border is an open wound where the third world grates against the first and bleeds.
Yeah,
And
very
before a
good.
scab forms, it hemorrhages again, the lifeblood of two worlds merging to form a third country, a third country, a border culture.
Uh-huh, that's interesting. I like
Yeah.
that. I like that way of looking at it.
Yeah, and again, Wilson and Donan also say that borders are agents of a state's security and sovereignty, and a physical record of a state's past and present relations with its neighbors.
Okay.
And to me, that becomes very important because here in New Mexico, if you look at the past related to the border, in New Mexico we actually have three cultures. We have Native American culture, we have Hispanic culture, and we have Anglo American culture here. And of course, the Native Americans have been here for thousands of years. Hispanics have been here since the 1600s, which is 400 years, and Anglo Americans have been here since 1848.
Right.
And I have friends whose families have lived in the same pueblo or the same village in New Mexico for over 1,000 years.
Whoa.
You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's like who are the outsiders and immigrants now? You know what
Yeah.
I mean? So um and when you come to New Mexico, it's still, I never realized it until I moved here, that it's still very much alive. Like the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which ended the Mexican American War in 1848. The effects of that are still being felt when it comes to things like land grants, for example, where
Yes, land
Hispanic and
grants. Yes.
Mexican land grants that were supposed to be protected
When
under the
they
Treaty of
Under the
Guadalupe Hidalgo.
treaty, when the war
Yeah,
ended, they had certain assurances,
right,
and over
right.
time, those have eroded And so people are constantly saying, "No, this land belongs to my family. I
Yeah.
trace it back to the treaty." And there's an industry there that helps people with that, right?
Yeah, yeah, and and there was a conflict because again, with when you move the border, the conflict because or you created the border between Mexico and the United States at the time is, the United States was under English real estate law, or like where you had one person would own the title to the land, and
Right.
most of the land grants were being held in common, like the lands were being held in common.
Yes.
And again, it was by creating that border created a conflict between these different types of cultures or this history that was between them.
Yeah.
And the other thing to know is, in 1680, the Pueblo Indians actually revolted and kicked the Spanish out of New Mexico.
Right. Right.
And so, there was not everybody was happy with having the Europeans here.
Yeah.
And then, in 1821, Mexico rebelled against Spain and won its independence. And so California, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, New Mexico, Texas, and parts of Kansas and Oklahoma were all part of Mexico at that
Right.
time.
Yep.
And then you had from 1821 to 1836 that the illegals coming in were Americans
Right.
coming
Go.
in and squatting in Mexico. You know what I
Right.
mean?
Looking for gold, looking for cattle, all kinds of things they were trying to do.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah, and a lot of them came from southern states like Louisiana or Kentucky or Tennessee, and they came down to Texas to grow cotton. And of
Uh-huh.
course, when they came down, they brought a lot of slaves with them.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the reasons that the Texans decided to revolt against Spain or against Mexico was that in 1830 Mexico outlawed slavery. And so when they tried to enforce that in Texas, that's when the Texans seceded from Mexico. It was
Uh-huh.
basically the same argument that they used, 25 years later when they seceded from the United States. And it just real quick in the Texas Constitution of 1836, it said, quote, all persons of color who were slaves for life previous to immigration to Texas and who are now held in bondage shall remain in the like state of servitude. So it's it, definitely race had something to do with the formation of that border and in
Absolutely.
Texas.
Yeah.
And so then just back in at the end when the United States, Texas became part of the United States in 1845. And Mexico actually said that they were going to start fighting a defensive war against the United States because Mexico was worried about the United States encroaching upon their territory.
Mm-hmm.
And
For
so
good
then,
reason.
yeah. And so what the United States did was, they declared war on Mexico and just went in and occupied,
Yeah.
uh, all of the Southwest or what is now the Southwest. And they even went down and occupied Mexico City and force the Mexicans to sign a treaty. Now, again, that wasn't anybody wanting that to happen. You know what I mean? But they had no choice. And then when drawing the border between Mexico and the United States was just arbitrarily drawn across a line on a map.
Yep.
You know, um, and so again, there
Didn't
weren't
Theodore
even
Roosevelt and the Rough Riders fight in that war?
that was the war against Spain in 1898. That's when
Oh,
he went
okay.
down to Cuba and fought
Cuba.
in Cuba.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But no, this was like the war when they invaded New Mexico in the Southwest. They
Okay.
they got California. At the time, there were people saying, "Hey, we should take even more. Try to take the Mexican states of Coahuila and Sonora." I mean, there were some people that were arguing that the United States should take even more territory from
Yeah.
Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and then the United States, after the treaty was signed and the border was drawn, they realized they had screwed up and made the border too far north. So then they went back in 1853 and purchased more land because they wanted to put a southern railroad out to California there. So again, they bought more land from Mexico, more land. It's kind of like, like Don Corleone or something,
Yeah.
But the idea was, once again, the border, it's just arbitrary.
Yes.
There was no Anglos, uh, there was no really historical connection to Anglo Americans there at all. But after it was, drawn, that's when all of ranchers and miners and everyone started coming down
Mm-hmm.
uh, to the border. Like I said, the borders draw people to it.
Right.
So I don't know. To me, it's interesting because when you live down here and you know the history, you realize that all of these things change. They can
Yes.
change,
Yes. Everything we know of in terms of the world is all bullshit. It's all invented. We all have big brains in our heads that
Yeah,
has constructed all this mess. And here we are.
yeah,
Here we are in
yeah,
a prison of our own making. And you're right. It's all about survival. Really, what it's about is the fear of not surviving is
yeah,
really what draws those lines, I think.
yeah, yeah,
People in Indiana, they don't know what's happening. They get it on, they get their information from certain outlets that tell them one thing, and it's partially true, but
yeah,
not entirely true, and they're scared. They're scared that
yeah.
life as they know it is going to change, and that they're going to lose what they have, and
Right,
yeah.
right. Uh, Massey says that the incessant deployment of these images by politicians and pundits have helped to cement the symbolic states of the border as the line of defense
Yeah. Yeah.
for America, a
Yeah.
rampart that must be enforced at all cost to protect citizens from a host of dire external threats.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why you
And
hear, what's happening at the southern border framed in military terms, like an
right,
invasion or
right.
hordes or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and for most of like the 1800s or early 1900s, there wasn't a fence or a wall or
No.
anything.
Yeah.
People would just come back and forth between. There was a cycle between you for seasonal work, and then you go back.
Yeah.
And some people have argued that by making it so hard for people to get seasonal visas, that when people come to this country, then you have to stay because it's so hard to go back and try to get back across. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yeah. If you're only coming in certain times of the year and you'd like to
Yeah,
go back to your house in Mexico, you can't do it because the laws are such that
yeah,
you won't be able to qualify. And
right.
so you have to hire a coyote, which costs a lot of money to take you across. And you can't do that every year. You're not making
Yeah,
enough on the American side. So it doesn't make sense. But
yeah,
yeah, I mean, a lot of Mexicans that live in America don't want to live in America full time.
right,
They would love
right.
to live where they are, but it's just they can't make ends meet. They can't, you know.
Yeah. There was starting in the during World War II, when like a lot of young Americans were off fighting in the wars. There was something called the Bracero Accord or the Bracero program, where that was visas were given to Mexican workers to come work, seasonally.
Yeah.
And that became, and again, it was like a back and forth, a flow back and forth of people
Right.
through the border. Um, and that went up all the way until like the 60s, I think,
Yeah.
was the Bracero program. And there were problems with the Bracero program because, um, the workers were also mistreated there. Obviously, you were at the mercy of people. But again, it was like there was, when you're down here at the border, you see that there was traditionally a flow of people back and forth
Right.
across the border.
Right.
Uh, and I just want to mention one more thing is that people rarely talk about, or it's hard to talk about, is when borders are, a lot of those borders that are just arbitrarily drawn are through traditional Native American communities.
Yeah.
And again, their traditional homelands
Right.
didn't recognize a border. You know what I mean? And
Right.
then suddenly when you're drawing a line through there, just like we were talking about in Kansas, this arbitrary line creates an illegality where it makes it, you separate people by drawing that line.
Yes.
And some, like the Tohono O'odham in southern Arizona, the line goes through them and they're supposed to have the ability to go back and forth over the border. But there's always conflict with that as well. And they haven't left their own home. They've stayed in the same place. It's the border that changed.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah. Everything's constantly changing. Yeah. Whether we like it or not, there's flow and it's going to happen. Nothing's going to stay the same. Nothing.
Right. And as we mentioned, John, I don't know what the solution is to this.
Well, we don't have to worry about it for too long because at some point we're going to gobble up the planet and then we all got to get on a rocket ship and go do it again.
Yeah.
I mean,
I can't wait. Wait.
We'll be dead. Would you get on a rocket ship to Mars and be
no.
You'd stay here.
That'd be like George Donner going out to California.
Yeah,
I'd be on the rocket ship that loses power and we're just
Yep. Everybody has to eat each other. Yep. And for the record, I have given you, and this is not the first time I've said this, but I give you permission to eat my body.
Really? Okay.
To survive if you need to.
Okay.
So,
all right.
Yeah, it's so interesting to look at those maps, and what's great is to look at older globes, even just not that long ago globes, and it's like everything's totally different.
Yeah.
But boy, with all the fear about borders in the United States, we only have two. We've got that ocean on either side, and the Canadians, most of them don't want to come down here unless they want to get into Hollywood or comedy, it seems.
Yeah.
But they're like, But so in the scheme of things, not so bad. But the fear gets really stirred up, man. Gets real stirred up.
Yeah, and going back to what we were discussing earlier, it's like you have to confront that fear, I think. And that's the challenge of recognizing what really is happening, what's really under the bed.
Well, it's tough, man. If it's seeped all the way up into a 2-lane highway up into Indiana, this is deep stuff.
I know.
And it's going to take a long time to kind of unwind and get to the place where both sides realize, you know what? It's compromise, people.
Yeah.
It's compromise. I mean, hell, we had a bill that just came up that both sides agreed on. It couldn't get through.
Yeah.
But, anyway.
So, again, I'll finish with a quote from anthropologist Renato Rosaldo, who said that the U.S.-Mexico border has become theater, and border theater has become social violence, and actual violence has become inseparable from symbolic ritual on the border, crossings, invasions, lines of defense, high-tech surveillance, and more.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing I would add in there as a human is don't lose sight of your humanity.
Yeah.
Of you have to fight to where you're not dehumanizing people.
Yeah.
Whether or not you believe people should come here or not, they're still people. Don't lose sight of the humanity of it.
That's the trick. Trick. Boy, you're right. Well, very wonderfully researched and laid out before us. And I'm into Game of Thrones right now, and there's lots of borders.
Really?
I never really watched it. I watched it, but I'm binging it right now.
Yeah.
And boy,
did you read the books? Did you read the books?
Yes, I did read the books, and so that's why I never really, And I hear at some point it's going to turn on me, and I'm going to hate the series. That's what everybody says, but I don't care.
Yeah,
I don't care.
Stop before then.
Yeah. Right now it's still good. So, thank you so much. This is human number 2 signing off.
And this is human number one. Thank you for listening to everyone. If you found this podcast interesting, please tell a friend about it. And don't forget to check us out on Instagram and Facebook. We love you guys. John, love you. I'll talk to you soon.
Talk to you
All
soon.
Right.
Bye.
Bye.